Thank you, Honourable Senators. We are continuing our study of the subject matter of all of Bill C-15, an act to implement certain provisions of the budget tabled in Parliament on November 4th, 2025. And for our second panel, we'll be doing the clause-by-clause study of Bill C-4. So for our first panel, we've got people here from Alto, Martin Imblot, President and CEO. Welcome. It's always a pleasure to see you here again. And Mr. Félix, or Maître Félix Turgeon, Chief Legal Officer, Legal Affairs and Corporate Secretariat, and Marc-Olivier Ranger, Chief Strategic Policy and Partnerships Officer. So welcome to you. And we would like to ask you to make your opening remarks of 4 or 5 minutes maximum. And then we will proceed to our questions. Please go ahead. Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to discuss Alto and the impact of Bill C-15.
Rail service, the kind we see across Europe and Asia. It will link Toronto to Quebec City over nearly 1,000 kilometers of fully electrified, dedicated passenger tracks. Fast, frequent, and reliable. Alto will cut travel times in half and ease pressures on highway and airports and improve productivity in the corridor. Last February, the government chose a high-speed rail option over a conventional alternative, selected Cadence, a consortium with strong Canadian roots and international expertise as Alto's private partner, and funded the development and pre-construction phase. In September, it committed to a 4-year construction start target and designated the project as a transformative initiative for the country. Recently, in December, Minister McKinnon and I announced that its first phase will connect Ottawa to Montreal via Laval, with construction starting around 29-30. In 25, we really moved from an idea to a real project, and from explaining the why to demonstrating the how. 4 weeks ago, Alto began a corridor-wide consultation process, including open houses, virtual sessions, and roundtable, and the level of engagement has far exceeded our expectations. To date, close to 6,000 people attended our open house across the corridor. 100,000 people visited the online platform, and nearly 6,000 comments were left to us. Later today, we will hold an open house in Mirabel. Et à ce sujet, permettez-moi un aparté sur la...
And as an aside, please allow me to say a few words about the city and the region. Mirabel's past is still very much alive. For many, state intervention has left deep scars. The discussion doesn't start today, it just picks up again today. In this context, the credibility of a public promoter depends first and foremost on how the Act arrive early, explain something that has not yet been decided on, and listen before choices are completely made and decided. The approach becomes as important as the project itself. This is where social acceptability comes into play. At the same time, consultations initiated with Indigenous communities are continuing. Comments are gathered along a broad corridor which will be used to determine a more precise route, which will be presented to the public once again this fall. And in the meantime, the environmental studies required for the impact assessment are underway.
A project of this scale cannot move forward without a clear regulatory framework for Alto, but also for the industry, for the Indigenous partners, and for the public. Predictability is the name of the game. The proposed measures are critical to deliver the project with certainty, on time and on budget. Without greater predictability, I will be back here in front of this committee in 2 years to explain delays and cost overrun. But those measures come with responsibility. Anything affecting private property is deeply sensitive. Expropriation is a loaded word and not one to be taken lightly. Our philosophy, whether we run in urban, suburban, or rural areas, is respect, transparency, and dialogue. Voluntary agreements will be the preferred approach. Legislative tools are nonetheless required to limit speculation and manage financial risk and development progresses. Par exemple, le droit de préemption vise à prévenir
For
la...
example, the right of first refusal aims to prevent land speculation, and certain provisions prevent non-essential work from artificially inflating the value of land that may be required. The bill also amends certain expropriation measures. Alto may have to resort to using, but we're not there yet, because in 2026 our priority remains consultation, land studies, route definition, and where appropriate, the purchase of certain properties that are already on the market. But the tools must be known now before we go any further.
Your question, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Ambleau. So we will start by Senator Marshall.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Ambleau, for being here today, and your officials also. Can you start off by telling us the cost estimate of $60 to $90 billion? Where did that come from, and who prepared it?
Actually, it's not a cost estimate. I don't want to be picky, but to have a cost estimate, you need to have proper level of engineering, which we still don't have. So I prefer to use the working assumption. So it's an internal working assumption based on what we got from the three bidders, but also our international estimate. And you would appreciate that it's a fairly wide range because we need more detailed engineering. And it starts with having an alignment, which we will have only in the next fall.
Okay. So for that estimate, because it's being in the media and also in the report of the Senate Transport Committee, that it was an estimate. Like, was there a risk assessment? I mean, I know that it's a broad range, but is there, is that 50% chance it's going to come in at that range, or a 90% chance? Like, I'm just trying to get a handle on 60 to 90 sounds like a lot of money, but when you think of the magnitude of the project, it doesn't seem like a lot. So what's the probability of it coming in within that time frame?
We call it, in the jargon, the Class 5 estimate. So it's an order of magnitude at this point in time. And I really want to be prudent and pick an alignment. I cannot have an estimate if I don't know what I'm building, where I'm building it. So the alignment this fall, then the engineering starting next year. Hopefully next time I come before this committee, we'll have a better estimate than the working assumption.
Okay, so I take it from what you're saying, there's really been no cost-benefit analysis carried out. Is that correct?
Actually, we did a few economic analyses that my colleague Marc-Olivier can present, both macro and micro. So Marc-Olivier would be better placed.
Is that something, I'm just thinking about time here, is that something that you can provide to the clerk of the committee so we could have a look at it? So would that cover not just cost, but also time frames? I'm thinking about not only the cost magnitude, but the time frame, and how much a project like that would typically cost, because $60 to $90 billion sounds a bit on the low side. So is there a document that we can have access to?
So thank you for your question, Senator. We worked on various benefits of the project. There's also studies out there that have been done by third party, like the CDL Institute. We do have estimates of the benefits that would be triggered by the project. We had published on our website a very high-level general document. Back to Martin's comments around the working assumption, we are planning on releasing a series of documents that will outline all of the benefits.
So, based on what you're saying, it sounds like the costs, you don't have a handle on the cost yet. You don't have a handle on the benefits yet. So isn't it possible that when you do the cost-benefit analysis, it might show that this project's not feasible?
So we do have a fairly good handle at the benefit list. Let me rephrase my answer. When we look at modeling and economic studies, there's 3 layers of benefits you're looking at. Usually you're looking at what are the direct benefits to the users. So that's what you're referring to when you're mentioning cost-benefit analysis. So we do have studies that cover that. In terms of the macroeconomic impact, we're also looking at modeling with Stats Canada around how many jobs will be created. We do have estimates around that. And we're also looking at, based on other G7 countries, what are the macroeconomic benefits that are usually incurred with a high-speed train. Okay. So there's a body of...
Yeah, thank you very much.
Juste pour faire le suivi, donc, en résumé,
just to follow up, which economic document can you provide to the committee? We've got a document online to which we can refer you. We've got a series of documents that are going to be published with precise projections and forecasts. When will that be? We'll check that with Mr. Imbo. We're going to make this public very soon. I'd just like to share something else with the committee, namely, there is a sensitive point when it comes to our commercial relationship with the private developer. So all of the studies are not for public consumption, but in our public consultations, we've heard that Canadians want to understand the benefits of the project. So we're making this commitment to publish that in quite a short-term horizon.
Okay. On a le pouvoir de sceller des documents et
Now, we have the power to ask for documents to be produced, and they can be protected accordingly. So we don't need to just look up information on the internet. We want to have the true documents, and we have means of being able to protect these accordingly. Senator Faure. Welcome. Yes, there are sensitive documents, but there's parts of a territory that are very sensitive along the route, such as Mirabel. And in Mirabel, people have said, look, we've already been scalded once with what happened with the Mirabel airport and the percentage that was expropriated compared to what was actually truly needed. And in this project here, are you very sensitive about the quality of the farming lands? That is an extremely important asset for the country as well. And how are you going to reassure people in this region in particular that you're not going to expropriate a far bigger amount of land than what we actually need? Thank you for that question. Well, I'm from St. Hyacinth, so I know about the value of farmlands. We know there's not one square foot or acre that's actually surplus, so we're going to first of all, so we want to follow an existing route such as an electric line or highway, and when we have to cut into land, we try and follow the ownership, the property limits to not cut into land, but sometimes we will have to cut into land, and with a high-speed train, when we make a choice, it has impacts to kilometres in the east and west. We want to have the straightest line, so it's not just Mirabel. We look right across the route for the impacts. We're talking about 60 metres of property being acquired. So we're not talking about the same scale nor the same stage or what actually was necessary for Mirabel in the past. We're just talking about a few kilometres where I need 60 metres for the 2 tracks that we need to establish. So it's around a few hundreds properties, and we need to look at options, listen to people, what they have to say, and minimise the impacts and have a fair and just compensation. But we want to have people that are very much aware of the sensitivity in this region. It's something that's very unique. Now, we're talking about 30 metres as the rights of way. So are these proportions exact? Well, it's difficult to compare with CN or CP, but in our case it's quite easy because we've always got a minimum of 2 tracks, and in certain cases perhaps we'll need a 3rd track, but these 2 electrified tracks and access route, all of that will take 60 metres, not more than that, and we'll try and have as straight a line as possible. Do I still have time on the route itself that you want to unveil in the fall? And that's quite a challenge, given the importance of consultations underway. But it seems to me that the route will not connect with airports or the tramway in Quebec City. So the intermodal aspect of the infrastructure, I think, is an important condition as well, and a guarantee for success. Have I got the wrong interpretation here? Or are there going to be these connections to airports along the route and also with the tramway in Quebec City? It's fundamental to have interconnection with the transport services of the future. Up in Quebec City, we have to really be connected with the tramway of future, either at the initial phase or in a subsequent phase. That's fundamental for Quebec City. In Montreal, we have to be connected to the REM, and if we can find a place and we've got certain options that are well connected with the REM, and then we would have immediate connectivity with the the airport and then up to Laval. When it comes to Ottawa, we have to be well connected to the existing network. The LRT is there, so we have to find a place where we can serve this well. And it's the same thing everywhere. So airports can be served with 1 degree of separation. We don't need to be directly at the airport, but Canadians have to be able to jump into Alto and then the REM to get to the airport and then be able to come back into system. That is our objective with integrated mobility. Thank you very much, Senator Cardozo. Thank you.
Put them to you at the start. As a senator from Ottawa, I'm really quite excited about the prospect of the line coming through here, because there have been other ideas where the line would go from Montreal, Toronto through Kingston rather than Ottawa. I think that Ottawa needs an economic boost, and I think this having the line come through Ottawa is really important, apart from it being the national capital. So my 3 questions are, for the station, from a perspective of high speed, it would seem to me that Tremblay Road makes more sense than coming over to downtown and kicking us out of our building, out of the Senate building, which, by the way, we'll be out of there before you come, so you won't actually have to kick us out. But there have been thoughts about moving it there. Second is, how much of the line will be, say, between Montreal and here, how much of it are you using the current lines? And how much are we when we're talking about expropriation or changing? It seems to me you've got a fairly straight line. How much of it is going to be new? And the third is in terms of employment and youth employment. We have a real crisis of youth employment in this country. And when we have mega projects of this kind, I hope that you will have a part of your project is to make sure you're employing lots of young people, training them in the various ways that would be necessary to build a project like this.
Allow me to start with that third one, because it's near and dear to my heart. This job will require 50,000 workers. A lot of them are in high school today. They are in the Indigenous communities. We need the workers of tomorrow to be interested in developing and building and operating that line. So we're already reaching out to universities, colleges, training centers to ensure that we have the right workforce. And one of the reasons we want Alto to be perceived as being sexy is that we want the youth of tomorrow to be interested in this project. So definitely, it's a key aspect of our workforce development. On the station in Ottawa, it's interesting. We have options, and we will keep options until the last minute, just because of project sensitivity. But also, consultation is not to sit down and have a sales pitch. It's really to listen and look at different options. So Tremblay is an option. This building is an option. I had the chance this morning to go through the tunnel under the other building and this one, thanks to the security agent. And it has constraint to come to this building for obvious reason. So we'll keep options open, and in the fall, we'll be in a position to select what is more appropriate. It needs to be fast and economic. Thirdly, most of the line will be greenfield, even between Montreal and Ottawa, because we need to go through Laval, and then we're connecting Ottawa coming from the North Shore. So most of it will be using new lines, at least, well, a big portion of it. So, and before talking about expropriation, our intent is to have willing seller, willing buyer agreements along the line.
So why would you not use the current line?
We need to go to Laval. So today the intent and the best case, the best assumption is to come from Ottawa, Laval, and then downtown Montreal, and then going back to Laval and heading to Quebec. So it's a Y shape that is more efficient, less costly, and to connect the airport without coming through the west, because through the west is just not possible to do.
Merci.
Senator Ross.
Thank you. Senator Ross, please.
When you met with, first of all, thank you for coming here today. Appreciate you sharing your insights. When you met with the Transportation Committee earlier this month, one of the things you talked about was that the government committed to a 4-year construction period. You also said, according to estimates, Every year that goes by with no trains in service adds several $billion to the project costs, and if the construction can start in 4 to 5 year time frame and finish on time, it minimizes risk for Canadian taxpayers because every year represents additional costs of $2 to $3 billion. And you said that's a powerful incentive. So I guess my questions are, this morning you've said predictability is the name of the game. So my first question is incentive. Is that a contractual incentive or inflationary incentive? Secondly, if predictability or certainty is the name of the game, what is the start date? What is the route? What is the cost? And what is the length of longer time equals longer cost? I just feel that there's no certainty on any of those things at this point.
We're talking about a network of 1,000 kilometers. We're not talking about one single project. We'll probably do it in 3 different phases, so 3 projects. The first one, Montreal to Ottawa, is not a small one. It's 200 kilometers, 3 stations, but it allows us to use workers in both provinces, and it will allow us to learn and then deploy with more agility going east to west. We will start building this in 2029 with pre-work and 2030 with more significant work, and the first segment will take probably 7 years. So 2037, we'll put that into service, but we will not wait to finish the first segment. Probably 2 years after starting the construction of the first segment, so in Montreal to Ottawa, we will start building east to Trois-Rivières in Quebec and west to Peterborough and Toronto. So I'm much more comfortable on the scope and timing and numbers around the first segment because this is the one we're focusing on. If I were to throw very precise information on the rest, we haven't done the analysis yet. We have lines, we're consulting, but being impatient but doing things in a baby step is what makes projects certain. So 29 is doable and 30 will be constructing this project.
When you talked about your incentive being the additional costs, tell me what you mean by that.
Well, just the inflation is more than $3 billion on the cost of this project. Rule of thumb based on the economic analysis that we have mentioned before. Second, projects sometimes are scope driven or cost driven or calendar driven. This one is calendar driven because it should have been built 40 years ago, and Canadians are suspicious and skeptics about the ability for us to deliver this. So that's why we need to be very tight on the schedule, not promising things that we cannot deliver, but we haven't missed one single delay since we were created. I'm very proud of that, and we intend to respect that. It's going to be a challenge, 200 kilometers of a new technology that's never been built. It's going to be a challenge, but that's why we need to associate ourselves with the private sector. I do believe that the state only would be a challenge to do it alone. So with the private sector being with us, I think we have the good alignment to make it happen.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Senator Ross. Senator Costner.
Thank you very much. Senator Costner now, please.
Senator Costner? No? No? Okay, perfect. Senator Hébert.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. And welcome, Mr. Amboul. It's good to see you back here again today. I'd like to come back to one of the aspects raised by Senator Cardozo about the workforce. You've explained the fact that you're going to turn to Indigenous communities to get people involved with jobs, but in what you've published, there's a section on risk management, and in the risk management section, you talk about the fact that one of the risks is related to getting enough people to work on this project. Now, we've lots of witnesses who've come before us on different subjects who've talked about their difficulties in recruiting people. Now, I've never built a high-speed rail, but I imagine it's quite intensive in terms of labour. And with the immigration policies that are being set up in the provinces concerned and also Canada-wide, have you carried out a study on your labour needs? And how are you going to ensure that you have enough people to work on this, as you've explained in your report on page 8 on risk management? Thank you, Senatrice. This type of project is eminently civil, so it's workers in the regions that we really need, and that will maximise economic benefits at the same time. So to make sure the regions have what they need, because it's not the workers of Quebec City who are going to work in Peterborough. I know that's not going to happen. And we're not going to do this alone. We're discussing this with the Construction Commission and with Metrolinx in Ontario and also with Hydro-Quebec, because the three of us represent for the next 20 years. We're talking about enormous work sites, so there needs to be some coordination so that we don't cannibalise in terms of our force. And we're going to be starting work with our union partners. So we want to look out 15 years. And that brings back to the question from earlier, we need to be in colleges and schools talking about this so that people get interested in this type of job. There's also techniques that we need to think about. When we're thinking about a tunnel, for example, I was talking about the Montreal Metro tunnel starting today, and it's more expensive to have a tunnel, but there's 2 or 3 advantages. First of all, you control your destination. You don't have any social and environmental impact, or very little, and you don't need many people. So sometimes we will choose tunnels because then we can have workers who can be dedicated to other sites. For example, in Montreal, we're thinking about having a tunnel used there. But it will be a challenge nevertheless. And in terms of immigration, that is a reality. We've got European partners. We've got QLISISTA and the SNCF in our consortium. And we've had international support and French expertise, which has been very useful. Even in my team, I've got people who come from throughout the world who work for me. So we will try to have the right brains, the right talent around the table for the years to come. Could I please add something, Chair? Yes, on the question of immigration, I'd like to come back to this. It's an important one. There's studies that have shown that if the government wanted to carry out all of its infrastructure projects, there would be several hundreds of thousands of workers that would be missing in the construction industry to work on this infrastructure and these infrastructure projects. So if we're tightening immigration, and there's a demographic reality, and in the regions it's even worse, as you've mentioned, so do you have the intention to perhaps raise this with the concerned governments? Because this is going to be an issue. It's part of reality. I haven't just used one single forum. I went to the Chambers of Commerce and communities, and at each time I talked directly with people to get prepared. Because, in fact, when we look in the mirror, things are closer than we think. So get prepared for 2030. I told people, and I said to firms, your regional competitors of yesterday are probably your regional partners tomorrow, so that we can have more structured consortia to have more structured projects. We have an exceptional advantage here, which is that we have the Quebec market with the Trois-Rivières market, Montreal, Laval, Ottawa. We cover a lot of ground, so geographically we are well situated to actually maximize our striking force, and that is one of the great strengths of this project. Senator Tanis?
No, perfect. Senator Galvez?
Senatrice Galvez, thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for being here to answer our questions. I give a course at Laval University about the impact of climate change on the new designs for engineers and how we should come up with designs nowadays in that light. So I'd like to ask you something about your project. I'm very concerned to know who in Canada has the expertise to ensure that we have structural resilience built in when it comes to these trains tracking the St. Lawrence and the estuary. We're talking about tunnels. We've been talking about Mirabel and building for the future, not for yesterday. So how are we getting prepared for that to make sure that we've got structural resilience? And then there's a question of geography. We're talking about crossing hundreds of rivers and waterways and wetland zones. And also the flood zones have changed. And then there's a question of the energy, the power that you need for that train. That's going to change as well. We've got excellent European expertise, Japanese expertise, and Chinese expertise. All of that is excellent. But here we are in Canada, and we are warming 3 times quicker than the rest of the planet. So who's actually looking at these aspects within your consortium? Thank you for that question. That's always a challenge with the infrastructure to have a 100-year approach. We have to cover plus 35 minus 35 for the next 100 years. And so this is a unique challenge. I'll start with the energy side of things. There's no concerns about availability. We're in contact with Hydro-Quebec Green Energy and with Ontario. It's basically the same thing. It's about 50 megawatt, and we benefit from renewable energy in Canada. The challenges that you've mentioned, they're the ones that are motivating us to consult, first of all, along a corridor, and then in several months we'll come up with a route, because each kilometre where we pass is actually a compromise. Is there a waterway? Is there a wetland zone? Is there a floodplain? And we have to do that for each kilometre times 1,000 to really determine the route with the least impact for the next 100 years. So it's a colossal task that's ahead of us. We have international expertise in our consortium. You've referred to the French. They're on board with us. We also have Spanish participants, and I believe that we have a delegation from Alto visiting Korea and Japan to specifically talk about climate-related aspects. And then a difficult subject, well, China has exceptional expertise when it comes to building high-speed rail networks. And through international high-speed networks, we have this pool of technical expertise, in particular when it comes to managing climate variability and climate variation. So we're going to draw in that expertise, but it is a challenge. It's a constraint, and we'll have to design it correctly for the next 100 years. I'd like to put another question to you, and you can answer in writing. Namely, there needs to be redundancy built in to the infrastructure, and then there's the modular aspects as well, because risk analyses have to be carried out. Do you have that expertise in Canada? I know it exists elsewhere, but do we have that here in Canada? And you can answer in writing. Thank you very much. Senator Gignac, thank you, Chair, and welcome to you, Mr. Imbeau, and your team. Well done for your approach. I think it's very important, in particular when it comes to social acceptability, to organise these consultations and so on. The high-speed rail has been identified as a major project of national interest by the government, but I'd like to lead you off in a different direction for a moment. In the UK, there's a high-speed train to HS2. It started, but it kind of all fell away. So there's 2 strands to my question. First of all, what is your comfort zone when it comes to your range of costs? Because we're talking about 350 kilometres costing 100 billion. Here it's 1,000 kilometres and going to cost less than 100 billion. So are we comparing apples with oranges because of the configuration of the land, or how can we actually rely on that estimate? Then the second strand of my question is more significant. Are there any lessons that we can draw from what's happened in the UK to avoid a situation where all of a sudden we're still talking about this in 50 years? Because in 15 years ago, I was in the Shelley government, and we were pushing on Ottawa to get a high-speed rail. And 15 years later, we fast forward, and we're still talking about this. So what happened in the UK, and are there lessons that we can draw from that, or that parliamentarians should draw from the UK experience? Thank you for the range of costs. It's very difficult to compare one region and one project with another. The Financial Times published something a few weeks ago where there was a rule of thumb of about 100,000 per kilometre. And when we looked at that, we would say, right, that's where we land. But if you've got one hand in the fridge and the other in the oven, then you don't get 0 degrees in the middle. So we have to be careful. Once I've got a route and engineering information, then I can come up with the cost estimates, because, of course, there were very constraints in the UK. It's very difficult to build. It's different from the farmlands in Quebec. Now, with HS2, I think that's one of the projects that we have to follow very closely, because this recipe for disaster was really built in there. We've got got California and HS2. Those are the two examples to not follow. In California, we start nowhere and we finish nowhere, and we don't have the funding to do the project. So do a little bit and then you'll stop again. So there's lots of little bits, but there's nothing that's connected and everything's stalled. Nothing's happening down there. Turning now to HS2, it's a little bit the opposite scenario. They were given a mandate, and with multiple interventions, they kept changing the configuration of the project. They changed the route. They asked for a station here, and they gave a station there. We changed the project so much that interventionism created a Frankenstein railway. And one day the government woke up and said, what I wanted to build 3 years ago is not what you're actually developing now at all. Everyone put in their grain of salt. Everybody asked for an extra mandate. And that really completely changed the project so much that it's been cancelled. The costs became prohibitive. The project has been cancelled, and now there's a great deal of social and political tension around this. So I think we need to go for a recipe that works, where we give a mandate, we put for the recipe for how we're going to carry this out, and then let the project get going. That's how we can deliver these projects that are difficult to execute. But if we keep adding in this, that, and the next thing to the configuration, it becomes very difficult to manage. So that's a very important lesson to draw from what happened in the UK. Thank you. Now, Senator Dalphond. Thank you, Chair. Well, it's always a pleasure to have the team with us from Alto, partly made up of VIA from the past. And I'm very much in favour of this project personally. But there is still some opposition for people who are misinformed. You've said there's lots of interest in this, no doubt. But when I look at the emails that I get, not just from people from Mirabel, but also in the corridor in Peterborough, we're talking about the Frontenac region, which is ecologically protected by certain regulations, and perhaps it will be under threat. And the Department of Transport has said, like you've said, that we're going to follow highways and try not to disturb things. But between Ottawa and Peterborough, apparently that's not going to be possible. So could you give us more specific details? People are worried. They say that their properties are frozen for years. They can't do any changes. So when are we going to go from a broader approach to a more specific approach to know whether they're in the zone or not? Because in Peterborough, there's two possible routes that are being discussed. So can you be more specific about dates and give people some reassurance? Thank you, Senator. Opposition doesn't just come from people who are against the project. Opposition can come from someone who is legitimately worried because they don't know where we're going to pass. Under this type of project, there's an extraordinary societal benefit, but of course it has a significant local impact for families. So I've got a great deal of respect for all forms of opposition, all the questions coming in, and this is only going to increase. We decided to start with a broad corridor because the 60 metres band, it has local impacts, but it's not enormous, apart from the people who are affected. But we have to choose it very wisely, these 60 metres. If we had put forward the 60 metres range, and we received this in the consultations, people said to us, we were going to throw tomatoes at you because it was not realistic. You wouldn't have been credible to have chosen something without talking to us first. So that's why it's with the corridor we can define the route with the least impact. And then in the fall, in a very detailed way, in the first segment, we'll be able to determine each of the different parcels of land that have been identified, and we're not going to leave owners languishing for a long period of time. We want to make sure that land can get secured as soon as possible. It's Maître Turgeon who's responsible for this. So this is going to be in the fall. I can promise you that we're going to have 60 metres to present. Then the other concern is about the buyback price, because with certain expropriation procedures, they have been changed or suspended, so they're afraid that they're not going to get the fair market value. So been able to give them any guarantees that those who bought property last year and who paid 800,000 are not going to just get 400,000 when it's expropriated. Expropriation has not been changed when it comes to the calculation for compensation, as has just been said by Mr. Imbo. We want to try and have individual agreements with owners, and we're very sincere when it comes to that. If for a certain reason we're not able to agree on this on the basis of the market value, at that point in time, then we will start an expropriation process. But the provision that refers to the calculation of compensation is not impacted by C15, and the Expropriation Act says that the calculation is based on the market value, and not just the market value of the property, but also the expenses which have been incurred as a result. This process will be reimbursed, so it's the fair market value that will be the criterion applied. Yes, thank you. And now I'm going to jump in on this because that was one of my questions as well. Now, you've said on the one hand that, yes, we're going to try and agree with them, we're going to try and negotiate in good faith and reassure them. I'm listening to you. I've heard what you've said, but the bill in front of us, we're removing the obligation to try to negotiate an agreement. So if you've got the intention to do that, then we can delete this part from C15. There'd be no problem, no? Now, this is for railway companies that are private, such as CN or CPKC. But here we're talking about a public service that we're building like a private company. But here we're talking about the expropriation, the provision in the Expropriation Act, which obliges the railway company to try to reach an agreement. It's a specific point in the legislation that just applies to expropriations at the request of railway companies. Alto is going to become a railway company, but unlike the other railway companies such as CN or CP, Alto actually is a public service. So what the C15 provision has said is to bring Alto into the same situation as another type of expropriation for public service interests motivated by the Government of Canada. Now, Chair, if we talk about cows, once we've actually determined the route, the reality is that we have to go through there. Now, Senator Dalphond, I don't want to lose my time or his. I've got some other questions as well myself. But Senatrice McKinnon, do you have a question?
So when Transport Canada was here at our committee, I mentioned that I was interested in the overall oversight of the project. And I just want to reiterate that here. I'd like to hear from you what the responsibilities of Alto would be versus Transport Canada, as well as the Cadence Consortium. How is that going to all work so that there will be adequate oversight of this project and reporting to the highest level of government and to Parliament?
Allow me to start with Cadence, and Mr. Ranger will cover the very structured governance that we have with and the oversight that we have with the agencies. We are the project authority, so our role is actually to be fully dedicated to oversee what Cadence is doing. So we have expertise on the law, land acquisition, technical engineering, cost assessment, and everything. So our job when we wake up in the morning is to ensure that Cadence delivers on its mandate. So we are the oversight and the authority based on a contract and other contracts that will be negotiated. But there's many other layers above that.
So in terms of the Government of Canada, so the Minister of Transport is the minister responsible for the project in front of Parliament. Alto, as a Crown Corporation, was stood up as an independent. It's under the FAA Part 10. This is our enabling legislation, and so we're a parent and agent Crown. In terms of our governance structure, you have a board that oversees all of the activities of the corporation that hire the CEO. The relationship with the transportation portfolio or the Department of Transport is the authority in terms of policy orientation. So they do fix in collaboration with us what are the project outcomes we're trying to achieve. When we stood up the corporation, Alto, as a project office, it was stood up as an independent organization with full transparency. So in terms of an organization, we're receiving appropriation from Parliament directly. There's full visibility and transparency in terms of the amount of money we're receiving. It's segregated from Via Rail. Those are totally separate. And then as a corporation, from an accountability perspective, like all Crown Corporation, we're subject to disclosure of our corporate plans, annual reports. We release quarterly financial statements. All of the reporting requirements under Privacy Act, Access to Information Acts applies to us, and many others. The auditor of the corporation is also the OAG, just for your information. They're part of our audit committee. We're going to be subject to a special examination after a period of 8 years, like any other Crown corporation. So as a corporation, the Alto has been stood up as an independent project office. With regards to transport, they have a policy role with Alto. So what are the enabling legislation that is required? What should be the mandate of Alto? They're advising the minister and ensuring that we're delivering on the mandate that was awarded to us. So when the Minister of Transport reports back to Parliament, he has the advice of both Alto and the departmental officials that are performing an oversight and a due diligence in terms of the work we're conducting.
I have another question with regards to costs. So you mentioned that the working assumption is that the costs of the project could range from 60 billion to 90 billion. So I'm just wondering, is that just capital costs, or, what about the operational costs? Is there a working assumption on annual operating costs for the project?
Those assumptions are capital costs. It's really the cost to build the project, and operating costs, it's too early because the business model will be refined with Cadence, and their partner will come later in the development phase.
Okay. So of this, these total, project costs, call it a working assumption or whatever, do we have a working assumption of the, an estimate of the percentage of the costs that would be incurred by the Government of Canada versus the private sector? I know there's privacy concerns and you can't talk details, but do you have any kind of an estimate on the percentages?
For sure, the project is developed and owned by Canada. So it's a public service that is paid mainly by Canadian and remains on the books of Canada. So we will have investment from the private sector, but the investment is really to align the interest and to manage the risk of the development. The asset per se is really financed by Canada. Then the project generates enough revenue to be self-sufficient once in operation, because we think we'll have 25 million people by mid-century, so it will be self-sufficient, not requiring any more subsidy from the operation, even including the subsidy paid today by Via Rail. We will be profitable on the operation side enough to cover both costs. Those are the assumptions for today.
Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Sénateur Clément.
Thank you, Senator Clément, Senatrice Clément. Thank you, Chair. I have a question. I've appreciated your comments about Mirabel and Saint-Hyacinthe. I'm from Cornwall in Ontario, not Peterborough. And you talked about consultations with the communities earlier. What about Cornwall? For example, they're not really part of the project at all. They're completely outside of the project. They need to be reassured as well in these other communities so that they're not going to be even further cut off from larger city centres. So what are you doing for these other communities that are not at all involved in the project and they're not going to receive any potential benefits from this project, perhaps? That's a good question. Well, of course, it depends on where the route is going to fall. Perhaps we should have placed emphasis on the fact that the Via Rail service that's currently there is going to be maintained. We're not going to cut off communities, so there's going to be two services that will be operated in a parallel and integrated way. So it'll be more efficient for people in Cornwall. If they don't want to cover large distances, they can jump into Alto after via Peterborough. So perhaps we need to better explain this to people. So thank you very much for that suggestion. We're not perfect and we're open to recommendations. Thank you very much for that. I appreciate it.
Thank you for coming, and I want to share the frustration. My colleague Clément Gignac, the two of us were ministers in 2010 when we spent millions of dollars updating 16 reports that had been written at that time on high-speed rail because we intended to take that next step. And I'll remind you that in 1982, the mayor of Windsor, John Milson, held the first press conference on high-speed rail then between Windsor and Quebec City. So that's the origins that many people around this table have on your project. So we want you to get on with it. I also respect the difficulty of these big projects. And I would suggest, especially in the area of expropriations, when we talk about this, the nervousness that follows. And I would urge you to use the examples of when provincial and federal governments engaged in this very recently with bringing the 401 from its origins all the way to the bridge, the new bridge in Windsor. And that was my riding, mon circonscription. It was part of my political career to have to go knock on these doors and tell them that we're taking their homes. So it was not easy. But I was really heartened by the process that the bureaucrats used and that the local politicians engaged with those bureaucrats to make sure it was done in a proper way to really take care of these people. And I feel very confident that people were treated very fairly. And I urge you to show these people when you get to that point. This is the history that the government has on these types of things so that they have some level of assurance that it's going to be done well for them. We took care of people all along that corridor. Very few issues, I have to say, and it was a very big project, obviously. I did want to also add that you don't start with the economic benefit of this project, and I wish that you did, because back in those days, Clement and I will recognize that we talked about why it was so necessary to move the workforce across this country as our economy grows to include massive technology hubs, massive pharmaceutical hubs, places where executives have to zip back and forth, the expertise in science between Montreal, between Toronto, those institutions, how a professor from Quebec can race over to Toronto, speak in the afternoon, and be home for dinner. Those are key benefits that benefit the economy. And I do think you have to update your GDP impacts of this project so people can see the cost, yes, is critical. These numbers are massive. But over the long term, which this project is, you have to show the overall benefit, the growth around the terminals that you'll build, because what it means when you are close to one of those terminals is an awesome opportunity for business and fantastic for individuals who have to travel very quickly and get home for supper. And I think that has to be part of how you start this conversation every time. So I'll see any time that's left for you to comment. Thanks.
Mon observation and a question. Donc, je comprends que c'est un commentaire. Peut-être vous pouvez
I
ajouter.
understand that it was a comment, and perhaps you could add something. You've got 45 seconds.
In the community, because that's exactly how we start. I had 4 minutes of opening statements. I could not cover that. 25 billion of economic boost. The impact on the GDP is 25 billion, so it's 1.1% on the GDP with the project. Thanks for the recommendation of the 401. I'm not familiar enough, so we'll look into that. And as Rick Mercer said, Canada is the champion of high-speed rail reports. So this time, we will try to make you proud, and we will build it and not produce another report.
Monsieur Imblot, j'ai quelques questions.
Mr. Ambo, I'd like to put some questions to you. Something that disturbs me in the current process is that we're removing rights from people, and they don't know that yet. So we're taking away recourse for expropriation, and we're removing rights to public hearing, and we're rendering confidential Indigenous knowledge, so people won't have access to that information around Indigenous knowledge that might allow them to actually challenge or have discussions around the route. And we're removing any recourse to the Canadian Transportation Agency, which normally is an administrative tribunal of a legal nature that can hear the parties and grant rights. So when you think you want to treat people fairly, well, for a lawyer like me who's specialized in public law and procedural fairness, I am very much shocked by this. So why are you removing these rights to redress in C-15, recourse to an impartial independent agency that could actually listen to the parties on questions of the route chosen? Now, I've known you for a great deal of time, and you're a wonderful communicator. and we want to drink from your magic potion, but nevertheless, for the people who are actually going to be impacted directly by the route chosen. And when we analyze this, for example, with Mirabel, you've said, right, we're going to try and follow the parcels of land limits. But in another place, you've said that to deviate from a few degrees, it's going to impact 30 to 40 kilometers. So you can't just track these parcels of land and that they're not going to be subdivided. So why are you going to remove these, or why do you want to remove these? Because we haven't voted on this. We're the ones who are going to decide on this bill. But why are you removing these rights of redress for future people who are going to be impacted with these expropriations and they're not yet aware of this? So why are they not going to be able, for example, to seek redress from the Canadian Transportation Agency? Of course, I'm not going to take the place of the government. And that comment is more addressed towards the government, I believe. Inaudible comments from Senator Carignan. The opposition remain. And I think we've got a transparency built in. People can still object, and the compensation rights have not been affected. What I started to see is that once the route has actually been determined, the reality of the matter is that we will have chosen several kilometres to the east and to the west where it could have passed. So to believe that objection could change the route back then would be rather an illusion. So to start construction in 2029, if we followed a traditional Canadian Transportation Agency procedure, I can guarantee, Chair, that I'd come back to you in 2029. I wouldn't have got anything started. It's a choice, really, that has to be made. So what is being planned and proposed is that they'll know the procedure beforehand. There's a possibility to object this and to have fair treatment under compensation rights, but with a different type of timetable. And owners are not aware of this because we've not yet collectively decided where we're going to pass. We're going to do that in the fall. And once I've got my 60 metres, the first people, when that's been defined, we're going to sit down with the properties and see this is the procedure, this is where we're going to pass, and this is what it's all about. It's different, but it's not shortcuts either. Well, with the C15, we're going to tie their hands. So just be a few means left to challenge this. Just a few. We're going to tie these people's hands. And then afterwards we'll say to them, we'll try and take on Alto, which is the judge, the arbiter, and the party when it comes to their route. No, it's not Alto that's going to be responsible for that process. It's going to be Public Services and Procurement Canada that's going to deal with this. We're the authority that will make the recommendation about the route. But afterwards, it's the PSPC expropriation procedure that will kick in. Now, I'd like to come back to this question of Indigenous knowledge. That was at the explicit request of several communities that were concerned about sharing their historic knowledge, in particular for environmental questions, also for choice of routes, that they actually asked us to grant that exception so that they could provide us with information that they knew would remain confidential. So we made a recommendation to the government to go in that direction to better collaboration. Sorry if that was misinterpreted, but this really was at the request of the communities. Okay, so we'll have to consult with the Indigenous communities. Would have lots of other questions, but I'll leave them for the second round. We're going to see you once again. In any case, you promised that you will come back before us in the fall. We'll hold you to that. So second round, Senatrice Marshall, you have a question?
Non. Senator McAdam. Senator Cardozo? Oui.
What you've outlined to us really sounds like a Lamborghini, and I'd suggest you have a plan B, which would be the Cadillac, where you would use the current lines. My fear is that if the whole thing is going to be on new lines, expropriating new lands all along, you have the prospect of this never happening. There will be, between now and the time you finish building or even get to build, there'll be one or two government changes. It doesn't take a lot for things to get out of control a little bit and a new government to abandon the project. Indeed, my colleagues have pointed out that this has been discussed a number of times. So my thought is go for the most convenient approach, which is to use more or less the current lines and do as minimum amount of expropriation as you can. both from a cost and a political perspective, it would be better. So at least look at that as a plan B, is my plea.
Thanks for the comment. Senator, actually, we looked at it. We spent 18 months looking at both options. And expanding the current corridor is simply not possible because it's so tightly built that we would need to buy and expropriate way more people because it's so constrained everywhere. And we would have a project that costs same thing or more and not being fast and not being reliable because we would still have to cross CN and CP. So that's why government decided to go with the new approach. Tricky, difficult, but the other one is not doable. I would not recommend it, and I said it publicly. If we were to do it, someone else would do that job because I don't think I can do that. It's just too difficult to build. Toyota Camry, reliable with a good warranty, is what we're targeting, not a Cadillac or a Lamborghini. Let's put it that way.
Dernière question, Sénateur Forêt. Vous êtes interpellé, la Forêt.
Senator Forêt, do you feel called upon? You mentioned that the participation of Indigenous communities were essential. Could you please give us a brief report about where negotiations are at with these Indigenous communities? Yes, thank you for the questions. We have 40 communities that are directly or indirectly affected, maybe others closer to the route. We are in communication with many of them. Many cooperation agreements are in place. The consultation process is underway. So we have a responsibility to consult. It's us who's doing it. But well beyond that obligation to consult, we have to maximize economic spin-offs for the Indigenous communities. And we would be very much in favor of financial participation by these communities in conditions that need to be determined. But the reception is they see their implication as being a very good thing. So we will certainly use the knowledge of the Indigenous communities, if only for the design of the stations and other things. Relations are good, essentially. Thank you. Thank you very much. We will remind you of your commitment to send documentation to us, the studies. Within 10 days, is that sufficient? Mr. Ranger, is 10 days sufficient? Could you also add, we didn't talk about that much, but could you add the studies on the projected clientele? Because I read Mr. Roy's study. He's a professor at HEC, professor at McGill. He seems to think that you're wearing rose-colored glasses when it comes to ridership or potential ridership. So we'd like to hear your figures about that. We'll provide that to you. Thank you very much.